So a couple of days ago, I decided to start reading this book called Kings of the Wild. I probably picked it up like 2 years ago. It takes me a little while to get through my library. I'm kind of a slow reader in the sense that whenever I decide to read, I only read like a chapter at a time until I kind of hit that chapter, a chapter that like gets me hooked, and then I just like read the rest of the book in a blitz. That's kind of what happened to me with Way of Kings, where it took me maybe 3 years to get through that book. And then I finished like 90% of it in like 3 days. Anyways, I like 100% buy books based on their cover because, well, at some point in my career, I'd like to do book covers, so I have to respect the hustle a little bit. And also, I just really respect the artist that I saw this cover for. I recognize the art. It was by Richard Anderson. He does a lot of the concept art for Guild Wars 2, and that's like one of my favorite styles of concept art of like all time. I love the look of that game. So I decided to pick this book up. That's not super relevant to whatever we have to talk about today. I just kind of wanted to quickly yap about how much I like book covers. I think they look cool. But anyways, back to the actual topic of the video. So I'm not like terribly far into this book. Again, I'm like reading it like a chapter at a time, maybe like a chapter like every other night. But there is something that kind of piqued my interest when I started reading this and I wanted to talk about today. I actually, because it piqued my interest, I actually finally read the back of this book, which I almost never do. Again, I purely pick up a book based on if I like the cover. I'm not going to get into spoilers today if you do care about that. Also, because I'm not very far in the book, I'm maybe like a quarter through. I just want to talk about kind of the premise of the book, which is mainly on the back, and like what kind of happens within like the first like 1 or 2 chapters. The book follows a retired adventurer named Clay, and he used to be part of this like legendary kind of adventuring party, and he's suddenly thrust into a situation where essentially he has to get the band back together. Like, it's on the back here, it says, it's time to get the band back together. When I bought this at Barnes & Noble's, sometimes they like the employees put like tags underneath certain books. This one, it just said like, this is your dad's D&D campaign, which I think is kind of fitting. The main thing I want to focus on is a line that gets repeated the first few times in, I think like the first or second chapter, which is Clay kind of mentally thinking, we were giants once. And then also at some point during one of those chapters, he is talking to like a fellow mercenary or something, and they are kind of regaling the tale of Clay's adventuring party, being like, I heard you guys killed like 1,000 or something undead, and Clay is like, oh, it was actually like 900, like he gave the exact number. And that's kind of what I want to really talk about today. I really like the idea of just like this information telephone of like oral tradition slowly morphing stories that did happen to people into something in between, myth, legend, and fact and reality. Because stories spoken by mouth very often get kind of morphed over time. People add details, forget details, exaggerate certain things, and things just become much larger than they would have been otherwise. Things become myth. Even if like the common narrative is wrong, it's something that everyone knows. That got me to realize that in my own personal game of D&D, I don't really have a lot of myths or legends or these exaggerated tales that my NPCs can talk about. For whatever reason, I have some kind of aversion to having my NPCs talk with kind of like nuance about the world. Of course, I have a log of like what happens in my world, and I have an idea of like, what's going on between these different nations in my setting. But of course, not every single NPC that they're going to encounter should realistically know all of that. It's not very realistic, or even does it make the world feel more lived in, if each of my NPCs kind of have an idea of what's going on at all times. I mean, even in real life, we get things wrong just all the time. I'm sure that you can kind of remember something just even from this last year where you got something wrong and someone corrected you, or someone else you needed to correct on just like a common misconception. It happens all the time because how quickly we pass around knowledge now, things very quickly spiral out of control. For information to get passed down, for one, someone needs to perceive that information, kind of translate it in their own brain, and then translate it into words, then put it onto the internet. Someone else probably reads that, does the same process, and then you can kind of see how that quickly can spiral out, and every little bit of information quickly becomes kind of obscured, blurry, and no longer quite the truth, even if it was grounded in something real. I'm just going to very quickly prattle off a few things that I find interesting that are very common misconceptions, because I'm annoying like that and I like to keep these ones in my back pocket, and maybe you're the kind of person who likes to have that as well. These are also mostly about food, just because I think food sciences and stuff like that is fascinating. For one, Twinkies, they don't last forever. I think that's one that a lot of people know nowadays, but they used to have a reputation for like lasting a really long time, especially because of media, and probably it was just product placement to be completely honest, but they did have like a mild reputation for being extremely long lasting. They last maybe like a month on the shelf, which is still really impressive for a pastry, but it's not indefinite. You won't be having them in the apocalypse. Braising meats doesn't actually make them any more moist. It actually does draw out moisture when you put something into like a soup or something like meats. It draws the moisture out of it. The reason that you might kind of feel that a meat is a little bit more tender when you put it into a braising liquid is actually because you're breaking down those fats, and that kind of like coats your tongue and gives you the illusion of moisture, but it's not moisture, it's usually just a little bit more slick. In peppers, the spices or the spicy like capsaicin, actually not the spiciest part is the seeds. A lot of people say the spiciest part is the seeds. It's the pith, the white, usually like the part that holds the seeds. That's where you find the most spice. And, you know, I think this is being dispelled, especially in the last few years, but MSG doesn't give anyone headaches, or at least you might have like a sensitivity to it, but that's kind of rare. But the whole MSG is like, you know, bad for you, gives you headache things, is very much rooted in just certain people's beliefs, I guess, is the best way to put it. And if you were to go past the food, you know, everyone's heard the one about like Albert Einstein failing math when he didn't. He maybe like failed like I think I read somewhere he failed some kind of like entrance exam once, but he was excellent at math, obviously. And then also like, you know, conspiracy theories just happen, like how people believe that Avril Lavigne died in like the early 2000s and just got replaced by a doppelganger, which is insane. But that's something that some people actually did believe and pass around for a long time. I just think as a DM, I need to personally kind of stop acting like every NPC is kind of like a reliable source of information. I think that not everyone is a reliable narrator, not even about the same parts of their life. And not every NPC should have all the information. Everyone's filtering everything through their own personal biases and their personal lens, and also how they got their information got passed down from someone else. I think as a DM, I just need to let go of the idea that each of my NPCs have to be kind of like this very great source of information. Not everyone's a reliable narrator. Everyone very often has their own biases and they get things wrong because they heard something wrong from someone else, or even they just got to that conclusion in a different way. So I shouldn't be treating everyone like they're giving the best source of information. Asking the local like tavern keep shouldn't necessarily give the players all the, you know, pieces of the puzzle, but I very often fall into the part of like, oh, I do kind of give them everything that I can, which is unfortunate. And why exactly does this matter to me? It's just because I personally really want my world to feel a little bit more lived in, and to have kind of like incorrect information kind of out there would make my world feel a little bit better. I want to have legends in my world. I want to have myths that kind of flesh out what people believe about these groups, this world. And of course, all of them have been warped over time. They're probably not even real, but everyone has their kind of story on this specific thing. Because having legends kind of really fills out a world. You can imagine people who are inspired by these legends. You can imagine people who are envious of these stories. People are going to have a real connection to these stories in this world. And honestly, even if they've never met them or even like really heard personal accounts of these stories, nothing is really as like awe-inspiring and or terrifying as like stories people tell themselves in their head. For example, in Baldur's Gate, you meet plenty of characters that have these kind of extravagant titles that some people have only heard of and they've heard stories of. For example, like Will, he's the Blade of the Frontiers, and then people kind of comment on that. Jahira, you know, she's kind of a more seasoned adventurer, and a lot of people kind of mention and talk about her when you first get a recruit. Some people in your camp have heard about her, that kind of thing. If you follow Lae'zel's story, you kind of, you know, have the Orpheus thing, you have Flakith, and the perceptions of those figures are all translated through all the other NPCs that you meet, and they all have something to say. You know, Lae'zel, some other people have things to say about these characters, and you never fully get whatever the full picture is. You just get whatever other people see. In World of Warcraft, because I can never stop really talking about it, you have a bunch of legendary figures and heroes. The one I want to focus on is a character named Bran Bronzebeard. He's a world-renowned explorer. Everyone kind of follows in his footsteps, and I think that's just really cool to have like this person who isn't necessarily a legendary fighter. He just really loves exploring caves and ruins, and everyone's like inspired by that. And I think that is an interesting way to have characters be built around in a world. I don't know too much about this character, but I know that Dritz is a big part of like the Forgotten Realms, I believe. You know, figures like that where everyone has some kind of like, if you were to play in a certain setting, most people maybe have heard about this figure at some point. To actually introduce that, I think there's 3 ways you can actually pull this off pretty easily. The first way that I think you can actually introduce this into your game is just take your existing lore, and then whenever an NPC is talking about that lore, you just kind of swap out a few numbers or words. Say, for example, this hero came by and fed 1,000 people. Perhaps through the lens of this person who's talking, they weren't there. They heard it as 100,000, and they've somehow managed to up it to 1,000,000. You know, something they just exaggerated it to a crazy scale. The second way you can even kind of include this misinformation is a little bit more of a meta way. If you have had other campaigns in this world, make references to it, especially if it's your own players. Like if they have existed in the world before, those figures from their last campaign are now legendary figures. And people regale their stories, but they're just a little bit off. And I think your players are going to know the lore and remember the scenes of these characters, but then they are going to kind of understand that they have affected the lives and the stories of the people in this world, and it kind of gets them a little bit more included. And then to a lesser extent, you can also do this with things in your current campaign if it has run long enough, even stuff just from like the first few sessions. And it doesn't have to be like legendary things. It could just be like rumors at a school that got exaggerated. If you're doing like a school campaign, or if you're doing like small adventuring thing, maybe some stuff at the very start with your guild or wherever you're adventuring with, they get parts of your story wrong. And that's being spread around. I just wanted to talk about this today just because honestly, I need to get out of the habit of having like NPCs kind of like info dump at people. And I need to more talk through the NPCs through their perception of the world, which is a little different. Like they're all going to have different parts of the story. I need to stop, you know, just giving people exposition. I need to have them have dialogue with these characters. Okay. Thank you so much for watching or sticking it through this long. I know that a lot of my videos are kind of just me. This is kind of like my audio visual thought process, and I'm just going through it and making videos with it. If you have anything to add to this, feel free to comment. I really do enjoy reading all the comments. I've been reading pretty much like every single one, and I really enjoy kind of taking these trinkets of knowledge. A lot of people are writing like full-on crazy paragraphs that I'm reading, and I really do appreciate that. It kind of shows that there's like a conversation having, and I enjoy that. But anyways, bye. Hope you have a great day.